Hello everyone, welcome back to another class on regeneration biology. In today's lecture, we will learn about the history of tissue engineering and also little bit more detail about how it is applied and what is the methodology that has been done along with this history. So history of tissue engineering is dating back to as old as 80s. I'm not going prehistoric. That also we will see as we go by. Tissue engineering is a field focused on developing biological substitutes to replace or regenerate damaged tissues that is emerged in 1980s with a key milestone that is including a 1988 National Science Foundation workshop where the term was officially coined in 1990, seeing the rise of stem cell and tissue engineering concepts. So the terminology of tissue engineering established in around late 80s and early 90s. But if you look into the history of tissue engineering, like historic origin of tissue engineering, in 1000 BC, the Indian scripture says, Sushruta Samhita says, Sushruta performed nose transplants in soldiers. And in 16th century, Taliakosi is used a four-arm flap for the nose reconstruction. That is in 16th century, several centuries after Sushruta. In 17th century, tooth transplantation was possible. In 18th century, skin and corneal transplantation became a reality. And 19th century, advent of sterile techniques and anesthesia, they precipitated an emergence of reconstructive surgery, because anesthesia is needed if you want to injure in the sense for operation you have to create injury. So anesthesia is a must. And in 20th century, proliferation of modern day transplantation surgery and utilization of synthetic materials for tissue repair came into existence. In late 20th century, shift in scientific focus towards cell-based reconstructive therapies and using various biological components, the building blocks the biological components that can create the building blocks to perform the tissue regeneration. In post-1950s, kidney, heart, lung, bone marrow transplantation became a reality. And in 1985, the concept of tissue engineering was articulated in detail with its full-fledged principles, etc. In 1988, the first symposium on tissue engineering was held. So, if you look further into the details of the tissue engineering, the early foundations have happened in between 1960 and 1980s. The seeds of tissue engineering were sown in 1960s itself, with researchers combining materials, science and cell biology, and leading to the exploration of tissue replacement. Can we use the tissue on a biological material or a non-biological material and use that as a material? You are making them more humanized or more organic. That is the whole concept that time. In 1970s, Boston pediatrician Dr. Green manipulated chondrocytes to attempt cartilage regeneration, marking an early step in the field, because bones were one of the earlier tissues where people worked a lot on fixing the damage, because many people suffer from the fracture and they were one of the earlier tissue types to get the attention. The term tissue engineering was loosely used in literature until the mid 1980s, referring to surgical manipulations or the use of prosthetics and biomaterials. So they are biomedical engineering field rather than using a tissue engineering field. The term tissue engineering, as we know it today, was introduced in medicine in 1987. So, which tissue engineering is not just a word that has an implication or an application in the treatment field. Yuan Cheng Feng, a researcher and physiologist and bioengineer proposed combining tissue and engineering in the year 1985, with the term officially adopted in 1987. Although it may sound a simple word as of now, but the origin of that word itself is not that simple. The formalization and the growth which happened for the field, 1960 to 80 was the conception time, and 80s to 1990s, those 10 years. In 1988, National Science Foundation workshop in Granley Backend officially coined the term tissue engineering in a conference that was established. The proceedings of this workshop defined tissue engineering as the application of principles and methods of engineering and life sciences towards fundamental understanding of structure-function relationships in normal and pathological mammalian tissues and the development of biological substitutes to restore, maintain, or improve tissue function. So this is the definition of tissue engineering accepted in 1988 National Science Foundation workshop. Succeeding the symposia in 1990 and 1992 further solidified the concept, and the scientific literature started building up in the tissue engineering. By early 1990s, the concept of applying engineering to the biological tissue repair led to the rapid growth of tissue engineering as an interdisciplinary field. This is the growth of the field of tissue engineering. And it had further maturation event. Joseph Vacanti, a surgeon, very famous figure in the field of tissue engineering, and Robert Langer, another professor at MIT, are credited with seminal work in this field. You can find lots of literature from these two people. Vacanti approached Langer with the idea of designing scaffolds for cell delivery as opposed to relying on naturally occurring scaffold, such as using some extracellular matrix from some animal, etc. So can we use artificially made biomaterials? So this was the whole idea. Vacanti designed and implemented studies to generate functional tissue equivalents using synthetic biocompatible biodegradable polymers. They are biocompatible plus biodegradable. Biocompatible basically means doesn't elicit an immune response. Biodegradable polymers means which can eventually be degraded as and when the ECM produced by the cells replace them. And these polymers acted as scaffold that seeded with viable cells. If you provide viable cells seeded on them, eventually they will get biodegraded. The first tissue engineered product that Vacanti was involved was the skin equivalents, because one of the simplest tissue in your body is skin, and they are the ones. Skin equivalents were the first one tried. The first FDA approval for an engineered tissue product without a living cellular component occurred with the pre-market application, also known as PMA, approval of Integra TM artificial skin on March 1996. So this is another angle of tissue engineering. You are fixing a tissue without any biological origin material. These days people are also making cornea substitutes. You don't need a cornea from a living organism. One option is to culture the cornea from the limbal cells. Other option is to use artificial material. So there are multiple definitions of tissue engineering. Few are listed here because today's class is about historical aspects and the methodology. An interdisciplinary field that applies the principles of engineering and life sciences towards the development of biological substitutes that restore, maintain, or improve tissue function or a whole organism itself. This is by Langer and Vacanti, the people who are pioneers in the so-called tissue engineering field. And the use of a combination of cells, engineering and materials and methods and suitable biochemical and physicochemical factors to improve or replace the biological functions was expected, and more definitions have come. The application of principles and methods of engineering and life sciences towards the fundamental understanding of structure-function relationships in normal and pathological mammalian tissue and development of biological substitute to restore, maintain, or improve tissue function. This proposal This definition has come from Y.C. Fung. And the application of biological, chemical, and engineering principle towards repair, restoration, and or regeneration of living tissues using biomaterials, cells, and factors alone or in combination came from C.T. Lawrenson. So different scientists, famous scientists have proposed their own definition, but in a nutshell, you understand what does it mean. So let us look what is the preliminary steps or what is the outline steps one has to follow up for doing this so-called tissue engineering. Step 1, getting the tissue sample. So you need a tissue if you want to do any tissue engineering. So it can be patient's own cells or the tissue of interest are taken. Which tissue you want to do tissue engineering, that tissue should be picked up. Then the researchers break the tissue into pieces. We will see how it is done, etc. in a short while. But it has to be made into single cell. And in step 2, growing the cells into new tissues that is needed. After breaking the tissue into smaller units, that is into cells, the cells need a structure, nutrient and oxygen. Structure here we are referring to a supporting material. The above requirements of the cell is fulfilled by the scaffold. That means scaffold can provide structural support. If the medium is put onto the scaffold, they get the nutrients, and the oxygenation can come from the artificial oxygenation or from the atmospheric oxygen itself. The scaffold help in the regeneration process of the cells because healthy cells do not climb on each other. They need a scaffold for their movement and the support. What is a scaffold? Scaffold are materials that have been engineered to cause desirable cellular interactions to contribute to the formation of new functional tissues for medical purpose. So this is the definition of scaffold. As you can see here in this picture, don't think it is so big holes are there, but this white part you are seeing, they have very microscopic structure, ultrastructural level. They are like, you can imagine something like that of a cotton candy. Everybody would have seen cotton candy. What is the shape of a cotton candy? If you look closely, it is a meshwork. Something like that is, and even cotton candy itself, people are using a scaffold. That also some people have used. So cells are often seeded into these structures capable of supporting three-dimensional tissue formation. That is the overall idea. Cells normally form monolayer. If you want three-dimensional structure, which are healthy cells, non-cancerous cells, then you need scaffold. Scaffolds mimic extracellular matrix of the native tissue, recapitulating the in vivo milieu. Milieu means immediate surrounding. I am sitting here, my milieu is my table and chair. So that's what the idea you should get. In vivo milieu is mimicked by the scaffold and allowing the cells to influence their own microenvironment. So first to start with, they depend on the scaffold. Later they replace the scaffold by their own ECM secreted by these cells. So function of scaffolds: allow cell attachment and migration, deliver and retain cells and biochemical factors, enable diffusion of vital cell nutrients, expressed products, exert certain mechanical and biological influences to modify the behavior of the cell phase. Scaffolds provide mechanical and shape stability to the tissue defect. So they can provide structural support, and not just structural support, they also provide some nutrients. They can be made such a way that these growing cells find home. They will find these scaffolds as a stimulating environment. It's just like you may have noticed, if a food product, if you are buying a cake, if you are seeing a cake which is color of dirt or a color of which is not a normal food, some blue color cake, you may not go. Normally a cake will be orange color or brown color or white color, this kind of, you won't find a blue color cake usually. So because normal food is not connected with the blue color. So there are many friendly colors you give for food color which mimics that of fruits. Same way, the scaffold also should be very friendly to the cells so that they can easily climb on them and grow. So these are all the factors that should be taken care of. So some pictures are here given, different types of scaffold just for understanding. Don't worry about the full form of the scaffold. PLA, what is PLA, what is PCL, what is UBM, what is PMMA scaffold. No, don't worry about it. I am showing this just to get an idea about how does it look. So this is having a peculiar shape. This is having another peculiar shape, looks like a haystack, and this looks like a paper, and this looks like a three-dimensional structure, looks like some sponge, ultra-structural shape of a sponge. These are all chemical matrix. They can act like scaffold. We will revisit in a later class about the exact chemical nature of the scaffolds, not right now. And implanting new tissues on them. This is the final step in tissue engineering. The scaffolds which are seeded are implanted into the body, and once the tissue get compatible with the body surrounding, the scaffolds dissolve completely in the as the tissue grows normally. So they have to disappear. You don't want them to be there. Even if it is there, it is okay, but it should not stay forever. Eventually it should disappear. Sometimes ex vivo monitoring is also done if possible. So what is the fate of these cells? One picture has been given. This is a scaffold, and they can be different biological and non-biological. Collagen type 1 is a biological, and hydroxyapatite, PLA, PGA, PCL, these are all chemical. And seeding of the cells, primary osteoblast, MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, and osteoclast co-culture, endothelial cells co-culture, etc. are done, and they are all now colonizing onto the scaffold. You can see it, and they are put into a bioreactor where chemical, perfusion, mechanical, and electrical factors influence the healthy growth of the cells on the scaffold. And then once you make it, the final product what you made, this was a piece of bone, you wanted to replace it, and you see it is implanted onto the middle of a missing part of the bone. Clinical trial, these are all done by various scientists, and ideally this tissue made bone structure can encapsulate, or it can get embedded into the bony structure of the patient. So applications of tissue engineering. It can be used in a variety of scenario. One is breast reconstruction, cardiovascular system improvement, cardiac tissue engineering, blood vessels, heart valve, musculoskeletal system improvement, bone regeneration, bone and cartilage reconstruction, production of artificial skin, artificial production of organs such as ear cup, kidney, liver, etc. can be easily done using this approach. Very effectively can be done. Then what are the advantages? Help to cure diseases. We have seen it earlier also, like diseases related to bone marrow. We can, if the bone marrow is misbehaving in some way or the other, you can completely get rid of the bone marrow and replace with a fresh bone marrow from a blood relative. So the patient blood relative means which is having a tissue compatibility. The patients don't have to wait for the donor. That is the beauty of tissue engineering, because your own tissue has been taken, expanded, and you are getting your own help. It's just like you have to scratch your hand. You are not waiting in queue. Someone please come and scratch my hand. You are using your other hand as scratching your itching hand. So the permanent solution is obtained because of this, because you are making what you need it. So like if you are eating, someone gave you a chapati, you don't eat the whole chapati. You, based on your mouth size or chewable size, you make the chapati into pieces and take it. Every two people will not make the same piece. Based on their palatability and their liking, they make a piece. So this is the beauty of tissue engineering. And success rate is high because it is original source is your own cells. A distinctive feature of tissue engineering is to regenerate patients' own tissues and organs that are entirely free of poor biocompatibility issues that will come from a donor if the tissue is taken, and low biofunctionality as well as severe immune rejection. These are all associated if it is not from a native, or if it is from a donor or other person. What are the disadvantages? It is a time consuming process. If I say tissue, you cannot order like a fast food. Oh, I need this 1 kilogram of tissue, deliver tomorrow. It is not possible. Expensive practice to do, lot of money involved. This technique is not developed well. That is the limitation of the science. And ethical issues are there. Oh, this person with this damage is supposed to die. Why are you fixing him? Now you are allowing him to compete with the rest of the world. Actually, he is not natural. He or she is not natural. So, doctor has contributed for his success. So these are all ethical issues. Requires a lot of knowledge about the organs to practice on complex organisms, and it's an irreversible process. Once you fixed it and something went wrong, you have to live rest of your life with that, because money involved, and sometimes you have to do new surgery, and risk of commercialization. This is the highest ethical problem, that people may start using anything and everything for commercial purpose, and it will become such a scenario that people can be reckless in their life. People say, oh, if my nose is gone, it's okay, I can buy another nose and put it. Like, you don't care too much about your shoes, you don't care too much about your your shirt or something, because you can buy, but you care a lot about your nose, because nose is not available, shirt is available to purchase. So ethical problems also involve the role of cell bank. The privacy of a donor may be at risk in some situation. Organ trafficking can become an issue. So use of human embryonic cell is unethical to use in human embryos in, but what about using in aborted fetus? And like I mentioned earlier also, people may end up using fetus for the cells, and people may forcefully abort just to get that tissue. Let us see what is the current status. The current status of the tissue engineering is the technological advancement. Where do we stand? That is the 3D bioprinting, that enables the creation of a complex functional tissues and organs. So as of now, what scientists are doing is, you can use, um, instead of using the ink in a printer, you can use the cells that is acting like an ink or a cartridge in a printer, and they will print, and you can scan the internal organ. So what actually happens is, if the organisms, one kidney is ready for transplantation, but what if that inside of that person, their belly and their interior is not perfect enough, it is not perfect enough for doing this surgery, because some organ may be bulged extra, then can you make an organ which allows the shape and size of that locality? In this way, you can create a beautiful organ if you scan inside. So what they do, they open up the organ or the organism's internal, and you scan, 3D scan, and then print the organ on that spot. And printing the organ has another beauty, because while you are printing the organ using cells as the cartridge, you can make, because you are seeing the internal three-dimensional structure, so inside part also can be met. You can read about the 3D printing, which is because people do it for 3D printing of a human face, etc. In a 3D printed photograph, you look like that person's sculpture kind of thing. These days, people print houses, buildings, they print using large robots. You can print a house, and it is faster than constructing a house, large house. Printing house means, I'm not talking about toy house. You can happily print. So because the 3D structure has been implanted. So that is the beauty of 3D printing, and it's one of the emerging field of science, and it enables the creation of complex and functional tissues and organs. Like in the previous class we discussed, newly formed tissue must have proper blood vasculature. Say blood vasculature have got a complex array of distribution. You know by scanning, oh, these are all the places blood vasculature, and start with it should be thicker, and towards the end it should be thinner. It is a very fine details, but when you make a new tissue, it should have already have the blood vessels. Later it may regenerate by, your body may fix it, but to start with, it should have a perfect dimension of blood vessels. This will be ensured because the 3D scanning, just like many of you would have seen hospital how MRI scanning or CT scan is done, you get a view of the three-dimensional structure. Like that, you can get a three-dimensional structure of the organ, so that not just muscle mass or not just cell mass, even the angiogenesis or the blood vasculature can be fixed perfectly in the organ because of 3D printing. Then comes the biomaterials, the development of biocompatible and biodegradable scaffolds that support cell growth and tissue regeneration. So this is an area which is very explosive in nature, like it is growing like anything, the use of biomaterials, because biomaterials have huge potential. It has gone to such an extent that you can have the biomaterial implanted on the damaged area, the cell surrounding will automatically migrate onto it. It is just like, you want to explore a unknown city, how helpful the Google Map or any other mapping service is helping. All you need to know is driving your vehicle, but rest everything, the three-dimensional or the two-dimensional roads of that city is clearly available on your hand. Like that, if you can provide a matrix which is made of a compatible biomaterial on that site, the cells will automatically colonize on that site itself. So it is a great bliss to have. Then comes the stem cell therapies. This is discussed and talked multiple times, the stem cell therapies, but stem cell therapies also have got some drawbacks. We will visit about them as well. Utilizing stem cells for tissue repair and regeneration with advancements in isolating and differentiating stem cells for specific tissue types. What happens with the stem cell, many a times the stem cells have got too much expression of MHC class 1. Normal differentiated tissues will have MHC class 2 proteins expressed, and class 1s are very minimal. And although class 1 and class 2 both are not targets of your own immune system normally, but the stem cells, because they have got this class 1 proteins present on them more, your immune system all of a sudden will get alerted why the cell has got too much of class 1, and there is a possibility that they can be attacked by your own immune system, and stem cells may not stay. But the qualitative nature of stem cells demands lots of MHC class 1 major histocompatibility complex class 1 and class 2 proteins present. So this can be one of the reasons. That's why stem cells, when you put it, although ideally they should differentiate, sometimes if you put 100 cells, 100 out of 100 may not, because they are vulnerable to attack by your own immune cells. So these are all the angles one should explore. Then comes vascular engineering. They focus on creating functional vascular networks within the engineered tissue to ensure adequate oxygen and nutrient supply. Although it can be easily told, easily discussed, but in reality it is not that easy. Why? Because the vascular nature of individual tissues vary drastically. Individual tissues do not have like you have a vascular nature in your liver doesn't mean that same vascular nature you have in your kidney. Depending upon what is the organ you are talking about, accordingly it will have a different vasculature put in. So understanding the vasculature in detail is needed for the proper vascular engineering when you go into the tissue engineering field. Then comes the organoids, that is creating the 3D mini organs. So organs and organoids are related terms. Organoids are basically derived from a tissue engineered cells, where they are helpful to study a disease or to study how the therapy is responding, etc. If you have an organ alone taken out from the organism, it may or may not be very suitable for a your research study. But if you have made an organoid, what happens, its behavior at cellular level will be same as that of an organ, and this organoid being produced in an external environment, it will be more resilient than the other tissue types or other organ what you take from the from this organism itself. That is why the organoid concept also is very very new, and it has got lots of advantage in understanding the disease progression. And like I told you, tissue culture in general is one of the most basic aspect of organ or tissue engineering. Tissue culture comes in every phase. What differs from an ordinary tissue culture is how are you allowing these cells to grow in an organ or get the shape into an organ is what is more important. So understanding the tissue engineering, also a detailed way of understanding the tissue culture itself. So with this, we will stop this today's lecture on tissue engineering, but I would request you to read related literature also in detail, and we will see more about tissue regeneration in the next class. Thank you.